I'm a non-binary parent and I have no idea how to teach my kids about gender. Parenting has no rule book, and I think it absolutely should. When our daughter was first born and we were in the hospital, I was shocked at how much they didn't teach us. It felt like they just kind of gave us this baby to go home with a few very basic rules of how to keep it alive and not much else. Taught us not to put blankets in the bassinet and gave us a demonstration of shaking the baby to make sure we didn't do that. But beyond those things, they didn't really give us much instruction. Now, my wife and I are fortunate in that we have some childcare experience. We've babysat before, and my wife also worked for a year on the labor and delivery floor in the hospital, so she has a lot of experience with babies. But it still felt like we were going home missing some rule book that we should have gotten. And as she grew up, there were so many things that we just never learned about because we had never done this before. Things like when to start solid foods, when to transition our daughter out of the bassinet. We actually kept her in there for probably 2 months too long because we didn't know we were supposed to transition her out. And most of us only have 2 or 1 examples of parents that we're basing everything off of, sometimes 3 or more, but in most cases, we don't get a lot of experience. And because we have so few examples, we typically look at our parents or the people who raised us and base our entire parenting identities off of that. We decide what we want to emulate from what our parents did and what we want to avoid doing just based off of that single experience. And when it comes to gender specifically, I don't have a lot of experience. Like, my parents were great, and I'm fortunate that they are pretty open-minded people. And so they were open to learning about gender and what it means to be non-binary when I came out. But these are all things I've had to learn about since becoming an adult and being exposed to this world. Growing up, my environment was very homogenous. I grew up homeschooled in suburban New Jersey. So most of my friends, pretty much everyone I interacted with on a weekly basis, looked something like me. It was a pretty sheltered environment. I had friends who weren't even allowed to watch SpongeBob or other cartoons that I liked growing up. So as far as I'm aware, I had never actually met someone who was trans until I went to college, and I had never even heard the term non-binary until I had already graduated. Because of this, even though there are a lot of great things about my childhood that I'm bringing into raising our kids, I also don't really know how to raise them with a healthy conception of gender. But it's something that is not only becoming relevant as our daughter is starting to get a little bit older and able to understand concepts, but also something my wife and I have talked about quite a bit. See, for a long time, my non-binary identity didn't change a whole lot about my life. Like, yes, I immediately started by changing my pronouns and how people referred to me, and that felt like this huge step. But looking back, that was only the start of a very personal journey. But now that I'm in a place where I'm much more comfortable and open about my identity, it's also become a bigger piece of my life. It's something I talk about a lot more frequently, and something I'm thinking about as I kind of peel back the layers of all of the social conditioning I've gotten to realize what gender identity actually means to me. And in doing so, I have found a beautiful, supportive community, but I've also gotten a lot of hate. And I don't personally care what anybody's opinion of me is, but it's a little bit different when the kids are involved. So when I get comments that say things like, someone call CPS or someone take their kids away, while I know those are empty threats, it's also a little bit unsettling to hear those things from people in the public, especially in the current hostile environment that we live in. Like, this country is actively making policies against LGBTQ plus people. So it just raises questions of like, is this something I should be talking about this much? Is this something I should even be outspoken about? And I really feel like I have no choice but to be myself. But I'd also be lying if I said there weren't times where I wish I didn't feel this way, or I wish I could just be someone that the world saw as more normal or acceptable so that I didn't have to make things harder on my family. But this is who I am, and I can't change that. So with that in mind, here's how I'm teaching my kids about gender. Before we ever got pregnant, we knew that we didn't want to find out the sex of our children before they were born. We just felt like there was some fun aspect to not really knowing anything about who they were until we met them outside physically in the real world. So we picked out some name options and waited to meet our child when we actually became pregnant. What that meant is we developed a parenting philosophy and also an aesthetic that is not heavily gendered. All of the clothes we got early on are neutral colors and considered to be gender neutral. Our toys are also pretty gender neutral at this stage. And we just did not create this culture of like pink and blue of heavily gendered expectations around our babies. Now, granted, our daughter's just about 2 and our son is a couple months old. So they're not really old enough to have a ton of preferences or opinions for themselves just yet. So at this point, we're kind of making the choice for them. But as they get older and as their preferences emerge, we'll let them be whoever it is they want to be. At the same time, though, we're not raising them to be completely ungendered individuals. We're still using pronouns, for example, that align with their sex assigned at birth. The reality is we live in a pretty gendered world, and most people are comfortable with the gender identity that aligns with their sex assigned at birth. It helps kids developmentally to have systems and routines and to be able to understand the world. So we're raising them with gendered pronouns that align with their sex assigned at birth until they're old enough to potentially tell us otherwise. In my experience, what's so much more important is education and freedom. I don't look back wishing that my parents had called me non-binary from the day I was born and used they, them pronouns for me, because of course predicting that is impossible. What I appreciate much more is my parents giving me the freedom to choose for myself as I got old. They let me choose girls' toys and choose to dress myself up in more feminine ways at times. I wore a lot of jewelry, clip-on earrings, rings, things like that. I also played with toys like My Little Pony, which is something they actively supported and bought for me. This freedom to choose without judgment is something that parents can impart from an early age. Already for our daughter, even though she's just starting to learn communication and putting basic sentences together, she gets to choose what she wants. She gets to choose how she wants to present herself, what she wants to play with, what her boundaries are. We let her pick out her clothes every day. We've always raised her with boundaries, especially around physical touch. We always ask her if it's okay to give her a hug or a kiss, and if she says no, we respect that. And as a parent, I feel proud when she says no to holding my hand going upstairs, because I know she's learning to be a strong, fearless person, and I don't want to stand in the way of that or show her in any way that she can't be that person. But as she gets older, we do also want to educate her. I had this freedom to be myself growing up, but I didn't necessarily have education around gender identities or labels to understand what that could mean about my identity. And until those two things came together, it didn't really click into place that I was non-binary. So once she's old enough to understand concepts of gender, we'll explain it to her. And obviously, we've been using they and them pronouns for me around her, and like she will have this kind of inherent understanding. But we also want to directly teach her about different identities. So in addition to not being overly pushy with gender and educating our kids about gender, we also want to raise them in an environment that aligns with our values. Because one thing we've learned is that kids pick up on actions so much more than words. My daughter constantly amazes me with things she understands just by observing me or my wife without ever saying a word to her. Like one time I was cooking and she asked to grab a spatula and immediately took it to the pan to try to mix whatever was cooking, which is something I had never taught her. So if you truly want to raise your kids in an environment that's accepting and open to gender identities, it's important to set examples for them. Now, in my case, of course, they'll have an example at home, which is a non-binary parent who is very open about their identity and talks a lot about gender. But also outside the home, we take them to spaces that align with our values, not just about gender, but definitely part of it. We take them to this local kids museum or to our local libraries, which tend to employ a lot of visibly and openly queer people, and put them into these public spaces that are very diverse and that are public resources for everyone. At the end of the day, our job as parents is to model, to teach, and then to sit back and support their preferences as they become their own people in the world. And of course, keeping them safe, because they don't always know what's dangerous. And so as our kids get older, I hope they feel that freedom and see the example of open-minded, accepting, and loving parents. Use those things to become the best most authentic, most proud, and open versions of themselves, whatever that may be. And for now, we'll just keep watching, loving, and supporting while doing our best to set our own fearless examples.